Continuing from where we left, Season 4 goes on with its general theme of, quote, immigrants deserve rights, end quote, which is, of course, a good message, but tells it in a way that equates immigrants with walking nuclear weapons and invading alien armies. Feel free to go watch the previous video if you just want to quickly catch up on what has happened this season so far, as we're jumping right into Episode 9. Well, kind of, as Episode 9 is part of Elseworlds, a crossover event that had one or two cool ideas, but save the stuff related to the Flash, ultimately squandered things like a lot of the Arrowverse does. And just like the last two crossovers, Supergirl is really more of a side player than a main character, and is primarily tagging along for the ride. Like last time, I'll save a full analysis of the plot for a potential future video, and instead focus on what changes come to Supergirl's side of things. Primarily that we meet Lois Lane. And again, just like with CW's Clark Kent, I really like this Lois Lane. She's funny, smart, assertive, and the chemistry Tulloch has with Hecklin is really believable. It helps that she kind of looks like Margot Kidder, I'm not gonna lie, but make no mistake, I like these two. Everybody else, though, is basically just there for a cameo. Plus a really awkward moment where Kara implies that she used her X-ray vision to look at Kate naked. That's really weird and super inappropriate, but it may not have actually been intending to refer to her whole body, so maybe it's not as bad as it seems, but I certainly wouldn't have made the joke. Whatever. Episode 10 deals with the fallout of Supergirl's firing from the DEO, with Colonel Haley being framed as the unreasonable antagonist for wanting to know the real name of the individual who has been fed government secrets for the last 4 years. Alex has to decide if she wants to have Jean remove her memory of Kara being Supergirl or tell Haley the truth. Obviously, she elects to protect her sister. That's almost a given. However, this episode does present an ethical dilemma that it isn't interested in answering. See, the villains of the week are a trio of Morai, which is a type of alien that can become invisible, who were captured as children and enslaved by the US government, including Colonel Haley, and they eventually are able to rebel and go after their enslavers. Now, what action should an individual who is supposedly an investigative journalist take to bring these slave owners to justice? If you're a writer for Supergirl, you might think the answer is none. But Supergirl has never actually been opposed to illegal detainment. The DEO imprisoned bad guy after bad guy without trial, and with no apparent sentencing beyond permanent incarceration. The Mirai are portrayed as irredeemably evil for not wanting to be slaves, and no character that we are supposed to find sympathetic works to free them, even if they don't necessarily agree with the original enslaving. Episode 11 finally has a subplot that has been going on the whole season without impacting the main plot, do something that's actually relevant. A clone, kind of, like part of her was split from her version of Supergirl, or rather Kara, materialized in the Soviet nation, or rather Soviet-inspired nation, of Kasnia. It's a sort of adaptation of Red Sun, but whereas that original story was about how even though the Soviet Union as a whole committed acts of great evil, there were many that believed the concept of Leninism and worked to help people and save lives, this is more of a message of communist bad. Anyways, when Red Daughter falls into a coma, it creates purple lightning, which creates glowing drugs, which turns frat boys into monsters, and despite all of that, even though it sounds kind of fun, it's not that exciting. Still, these monsters need to be fought by Kara, who has joined Nia in her vacation to her hometown. Nia comes out to Kara in this episode about being trans, an alien, and having superpowers. Anyways, Nia's mom dies, and her sister, who wanted the powers her mom and now her sister have, denies Nia's gender. It's really rough and dark, and Nicole Maines plays the pain very well, but for some reason the writers decide that this is the perfect time for Kara to tell Nia she's Supergirl, with her saying that she knows what Nia is going through because she has to hide part of herself as well. Fellow cis people, I hope I don't have to tell you that having a secret job, even if you can't tell your family members about it, doesn't make us understand what it's like to be trans. The term transmisogyny exempt exists for a reason. It's not something you can experience unless you are a trans woman. Episode 12 introduces Menagerie, a new recurring villain, played by Jessica Mraz. Oh hey, Major Crimes alum. Anyways, the one recurring Latin character this season is a Mexican-American jewel thief that, upon becoming a Venom parody, complete with a We Are Menagerie line, is a cold-blooded murderer. She'll show up again, and I'll explain what makes this more than just an unsavory implication. Episode 12 also has President Baker declare terrorism can only be committed against humans, and thus Ben Lockwood is innocent and released from prison. That's right, murder of aliens is now legal. Plus, Lena's give people superpowers drug is starting to show signs of success, which leads to her and James breaking up, which is framed as hard for her, but not really for him. Anyways, the US government wants to make superpowered bigots to hunt aliens, which leads to episode 13, which is an adaptation of What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. We meet the Elite. Manchester Black, whom we met last video, an imp named Hat, played by Louis Ozawa Chonchien, Menagerie, and one of the Morai, specifically one of the Morai that was enslaved. In the comics, the Elite are a response to the Wildstorm superhero team, the Authority, and are meant to stand in for the idea of supposedly benevolent authoritarianism. In the original issue, Superman famously gives the characters that have no qualms with murdering any criminals a taste of his real power, driving such immense fear into them so that they grasp that authoritarianism, ruling only by threat of violence, is not comforting, not healthy, and not sustainable. Is it the most thorough criticism of authoritarianism out there? No, there's a lot left out. But it genuinely does oppose the authoritarian viewpoints and near-fascist arguments that had unfortunately become a little too common in comics when Kelly wrote the story. The Elite in the Supergirl TV show, though, are not that. They are an admittedly leftist organization, one that scoffs at quotes from liberals like Michelle Obama, and is willing to fight to the death to protect themselves, and others like them, from the murderous militia group that is now backed by the United States government. They also have to throw in some acts of looting so that we think that they are worse. See, once again, Supergirl is a centrist liberal show, and Supergirl, the character, is obsessed with maintaining the status quo. The United States government has essentially declared murder of aliens legal, and Supergirl is still viewing self-defense as equally bad as hunting people based on their birthplace. The US government creates a satellite meant to kill any alien approaching Earth, on a show where it's been shown this includes thousands of refugees fleeing oppression, and Supergirl doesn't see this as a reason for violent protest. The Elite are willing to hijack the satellite to kill the president, so Supergirl is of course willing to save him, and destroys the satellite without bringing the obvious war criminal that he is to any form of justice. You might wonder, though, what could anybody do? Well, considering as this series goes on, we see yet again that the law doesn't apply to Kara and her friends. It's not like she's out of options. Even if we did want to see her take a legal action, there are plenty. She could push for impeachment. She could make an appeal to the United Nations, or anything like that. But none of that happens until well later in this season. But hey, they will work hard to defeat Hat, Menagerie, and the Morai in episode 14, as their acts of killing aren't legal. But, the question of how violent is revolution allowed to be is one on which people have differing opinions. But once again, consider the optics that are presented here. Rich white people are good people that support liberalism, don't take actions to depose tyrannical regimes that they live under, and don't condone violence, unless it's violence committed by a policing figure. Poor white people are evil, spiteful conservatives, although also union members for some reason, that hate minorities unlike the enlightened rich whites. And then people of color, with one exception, and formerly enslaved people are violent, dangerous, radical leftists that will loot and kill and do more harm for their cause than good. In episode 14, they show the way to stop bigotry is through being friends with bigots, not defending yourself. If it wasn't obvious yet, it should be obvious now that the showrunners of Supergirl want you to be afraid of revolution. Opposed to oppression, sure, but not so much that you do anything illegal about it. And either they want you to associate violence with people of color and poor people, or they are too ignorant to realize what they are doing, but continue to do it anyways. Episode 15, though, introduced this season's saving grace, John Cryer as Lex Luthor. So for those who don't know, Cryer played Lex's nephew Lenny in Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, alongside Gene Hackman, in a movie that Cryer himself acknowledges was, to put it mildly, not as good as it could have been. But he was happy to return to the Luthor name in an attempt to do it justice, and he succeeded. Cryer's Lex is everything you want Lex to be. Cunning, sneaky, charming, power-hungry, manipulative, obsessive, ruthless, witty, imposing, brilliant. The best villain the show has had, the only one this season that doesn't feel like it's trying to get you to hate a group of people, and one of the best adaptations of the character. The episodes featuring Lex this season are a delight. Episode 15 also introduces us to Kelly Olsen, James's sister, played by Ozzy Tesfaye. Once again, she's not a bad actress by any means, and she's actually a really nice character, smart, kind, and proactive. She hasn't been used as well as she could, like most black characters on CW shows, and definitely deserves more to do on the show. But she's a good character that is underused rather than one of the many overused bad characters. So, there's good and bad. She shows up as James has been shot and is in critical condition. Lena uses the superhuman drug she has been making, which now Lex has helped her with, to save his life, though obviously this causes side effects that will not be worth it. Lex, who orchestrated the shooting of James, escapes imprisonment. By the way, this episode begins to set up a romance between Alex and Kelly, which is pretty good, as they get to know each other as friends first, rather than just have Maggie tell her, "Oh, yeah, you're a lesbian now." And they have real decent chemistry. Guess which of the ships, though, is more popular amongst the fan base? Did you say the one without a black woman? You'd be correct. This episode also has Manchester cause a blackout, which is an admittedly dangerous thing to do, although he doesn't go for the backup power. Lex does that. But upon finding his supposed former friend, Jean, who has been struggling with whether he is able to truly be a pacifist this season, decides that Manchester is too far gone to help, as he has killed murderers and would-be murderers and hurt innocent bystanders, and elects to kill him. Not the serial killer from this season, not the genocidal president, not the leaders of the invading armies of the last 3 seasons, or any of the random villains he had no problem simply capturing before. His supposed friend that is willing to be a violent revolutionary to protect people is the one person Jean is willing to kill. What message does this show think it's sending? Episode 16 has lots of flashbacks as we see Lex manipulate Red Daughter into trusting him and hating the US, and he has to manipulate events to make it seem like the US is evil. Why would he have to make it seem that way? Anyways, while I don't like the pro-US innocence messaging and the Red Scare aspect of this episode, I do like the deviousness of Lex getting Red Daughter to hate the US so he can get the US to further hate Kryptonians. Finally, a villain's plan that feels like something you'd read in a comic book. Plus, he uses the new superhuman drug to cure his cancer and gain superpowers. Which I don't think is needed, but whatever. Episodes 17 and 18 deal with the fallout of that, as Red Daughter, pretending to be Supergirl, attacks the White House as the president repeals the Alien Amnesty Act. Nobody who is an actual character buys it, of course, but it's enough for the president to declare martial law and have Ben Lockwood take over the tech from the DEO to hunt her down. And Haley, who, if you remember, just a couple episodes endorsed slavery, is revealed to be somewhat of a good guy now, as she doesn't want to hunt down an innocent Kara. On a more personal note, we get James's reaction to the superpowers, as well as his recently being shot, which manifest in panic attacks and post-traumatic stress disorder. There's some genuine opportunity for him to heal and grow with the help of his sister and a professional therapist. And while I can't say if it portrays PTSD accurately as someone that doesn't have it, as someone who does have a mental disorder, I can say it does a couple of things right when it comes to mental health, as it portrays seeking help as something brave and heroic, not cowardly or weak like some fiction unfortunately has done, and there's a nice support system for the character. At the very least, portraying mental disorders as something that you can learn to live with and something you can feel comfortable seeking help for is a nice touch, even if ultimately I doubt that it portrays the disease accurately. Episode 19 showcases Dreamer, who, following Kara's forced retirement, given Supergirl is public enemy number 1, James's mental health leave, and Jean's identity crisis, becomes the new main pro-alien superhero. But more important than that is how bad Lena feels that she used an experimental drug on an unconscious man without his consent, obviously, and let her genocidal brother escape. Plus, Lockwood's indoctrination isn't working on his own son. Because bigotry will just go away with the next generation. Now, that's a bit unfair. I know that there are children of fascists out there that can get out of their parents' influence. But to have the one example of a younger person on this season have some magical resistance to propaganda, it seems to support the myth that Gen Z will not be bigoted because, well, I don't know why people think that. There never is a reason given, because it's obvious to anyone that thinks for a second that bigotry doesn't need to be outlived. It needs to be actively dismantled. Also, small note, they have American Woman play when Dreamer beats up a bunch of bad guys, and it's meant to be cool, but the song really doesn't fit, as she's being a force of justice, not a political comparison to Canadian women like the original version of the song was, or a temptress of any kind, as it's kind of implied to be in the Lenny Kravitz version of the song. The song Beautiful Dreamer, I think, would have worked way better in my opinion, but again, that's a very small point. That's minor. Episode 20 is mostly boring investigative stuff where Kara and Lena begin to figure out Lex's plan with Red Daughter. Given that we've already seen the majority of this plan, it's kind of a boring episode for us. What is really funny, though, is that after they discover how much of these events have been orchestrated by Luthor, Kara decides to take this damning information not to the UN, not to Congress, not straight to the media first, but directly to the President of the United States. The one that already declared mass killings of aliens weren't acts of terror, approved the use of a weapon meant to murder refugees, and deputized a nationalist militia group, that president, Kara trusts to take the threat posed by Lex and Red Daughter seriously. Surprise, he's been working for Lex the whole time. Kara gets abducted, but, it's Kara, so she's fine. Next we have episode 21, but before we get into that, let's talk about Krypton. Bear with me for a second, there's going to be a bit of a tangent. Krypton was a show that ran the same time as Supergirl, but only lasted 2 seasons due to low ratings, but I personally found the show way better than it was given credit. And the good guys were a huge part of that, don't get me wrong, but where the show shined was its villains. Colin Salmon as an impressive, charismatic Zod, Hannah Waddingham as the intense, unnerving Jax-Ur, Elliot Cohen as the detestable, conniving Darren Vex, Emmett Scanlon as the comical, disgusting Lobo, and Stas Nair as the chilling, haunting Doomsday that actually manages to be terrifying. A lot of great performances helped make this series really feel like an exercise for the heroes to even survive, and for the characters that weren't created for the show, these are some of the best adaptations I've seen. But the scariest villain, and rightfully so, is Brainiac, portrayed phenomenally by Blake Ritson. See, Brainiac in the comics is a fantastic character. Though he's certainly evil, he's not motivated by human motivations. He's not vengeful or lustful or hateful. No, he's just a collector, basically completing a set of tasks to fulfill his own purpose. He's part computer, after all. Now, as one of Superman's greatest villains, you'd expect him to show up in other media, and while he's made several TV appearances, he's never made it to the big screen. Even live-action Smallville really dialed down on the alien aspects of the character, removing the green skin and completely changing his motive. So Krypton remains the one true version of Brainiac in live action that we've had to this day. And, like I said, Ritson kills it. He's disturbingly pleasant at times, almost like the friendly-sounding corporate-made AI that comes with your computer, while at other times he sounds like a sadistic scientist dissecting an animal. He takes on a religious air to blend in among the Kryptonians as the voice of Rao, and he really gives off the impression that he truly believes himself to be on the level of a god. But through all of this, the emotion from one moment to the next is always muted. There's a hint of it, but it never becomes so expressive that you don't believe that this is a computer program. Why do I say all of this? Well, because in episode 21, Brainy, that is Brainiac 5, is injured by the militia and reverts back to the original Brainiac programming. And somehow, despite all odds, despite the entire season playing up Brainy as this goofball who overacts every sentence, we get an incredible version of Brainiac. I don't know what it is. If the character is a Supergirl or Legion of Superheroes character, the show seems unable to do them justice. But if it's a Superman character, Clark, Lois, James, Lex, and now Brainiac, they can knock it out of the park without a problem. Jesse Rath nails the cold, calculating Brainiac that we want, while still managing to thread the needle of being attractive yet unsettling. The writing is efficient and chilling, and I wouldn't have it any other way. He still wants to save lives, but the utilitarianism of his ancestors comes through as he is willing to sacrifice his friends to do so, without hesitation, and it's fantastic. What is my point here? Well, aside from to say well done, which is a bit of my point, a reminder that it's not like there isn't potential in this show, and I think that's part of what makes it so frustrating. There's genuine talent both in front of the camera and behind it, so when the show falls so flat, it's that much more irritating. Now, don't get me wrong, the Brainiac 5 that we saw in Season 3 was great too, but for some reason, with Wynn, the original goofy tech guy, gone in Season 4, the writers decided they needed another goofy tech guy, and rewrote Brainy to be a pop culture obsessed, playing it up for the camera type of guy. Aside from his romance with Nia, which is okay, not great, but we've seen worse on this show, his character feels like he's just there to be a receptacle for bad jokes. So after a season of getting tired of watching him, when I see that they can make Brainy interesting and Wrath can more than deliver on the lines, it's all the more annoying that they don't. Thankfully, this is something they fix next season, but we've still got 2 more episodes to discuss. Anyways, Red Daughter and Supergirl have to fight, but surprise, surprise, Lex betrays Red Daughter. On the opposite end, Ben gives himself experimental alien drugs to get on the same footing as James, but of course both of them will get cured by Lena before the end of the season. Alex relearns that Kara is Supergirl, wrapping up that pointless plotline, and in the end, it turned out Haley was a good person. Yeah, one that endorsed forced conscription of child soldiers, but we're ignoring that. She's willing to help Kara. Finally, episode 22, The Quest for Peace, is where the season closes, neatly in a bow. Red Daughter sacrifices herself to return her power to Supergirl, James and Alex defeat Ben, Brainy goes back to being a boring goofball, James and Ben are cured of the alien drugs, Kara defeats Lex, and, almost comically, Kara is able to get the information about the president working with Lex out, and the president gets arrested. Then, get this, the vice president, who became the president, immediately undoes Baker's actions, reinstates the Alien Amnesty Act, and somehow the general populace that had just been overwhelmingly positive to the Baker administration and supported his fascist behaviors are willing to let things change peacefully. Wow, what an insight into the bizarre liberal dream of a President Pence. Meanwhile, in the real world, we know what happens when people emboldened by fascists have their figurehead removed. They don't just give up. See, this whole season simultaneously wants to portray anti-alien sentiment as a serious form of oppression, and to do so mimics the oppression seen in the real world, while also wanting to encourage basic liberal policy and taking the high road as the best way to fight oppression, and as such can't make it seem realistic when they argue the heroes have won. In the real world, racism doesn't end when a corrupt official is arrested. Xenophobia doesn't stop just because a militia group is declared a terrorist organization. By portraying systemic discrimination as the result of the actions of a handful of individuals, and portraying the solution as simple, the show refuses to acknowledge how pervasive bigotry is, and how it doesn't go away with the actions of any one person. Well, as the season wraps up, they tease Crisis on Infinite Earths, Jean's brother coming to Earth, and finally Lena discovers Kara has lied to her this whole time, and is not happy about it. So, in the end, how was Season 4? On a level of villains, fantastic. They brought some great new talent to the show this season, and some of the acting is really quite phenomenal. On a level of social commentary, abysmal. Framing immigrants as inherently dangerous and bigotry as easily dismantled showcases how base the showrunners view the world. Look, obviously I think it's good to tell a story with a message of equality, but if you aren't able to do so without glorifying wealth, minimizing systemic xenophobia, and comparing immigrants to monsters, maybe you're better off not telling a story deeper than the surface. Next time on Supergirl, we enter Season 5, which is all about how technology can be bad. Well, at least it's handled better than this mess was.